Welcome to City and State TV. I'm Executive Editor Michael Johnson. I'm joined today by Gregory Floyd, the President of Teamsters Local 237. Thanks for joining us.
Thank you for having me, Michael.
And this is an interesting day to have you in, and a timely time to have you in, because the DOI, New York City DOI Department of Investigations, has a new report out about the death of a NYCHA worker, one of your members who died at a NYCHA facility. You've had a chance to kind of look over the report. What's your initial reaction to it?
My initial reaction, first, for our viewers, we have a caretaker. Her name was Toni Jackson. She was killed March 7th of this year. She was killed out in the housing complex out in Coney Island. The initial findings by the medical examiner's office and NYCHA suggested that she was killed, not killed, but she actually died of a heart attack, natural causes. We believe differently because we had our internal investigation, and now the Department of investigation also supports our investigation and suggests that she was killed by the hoist. Because what the medical examiner's office never mentioned was the 2x2 inch mark that was caused by the machine. Her coworker that found her head in the machine. Her safety helmet was on the floor, and she was in a kneeling position, and blood was dripping from her mouth. That's not a heart attack. In my opinion, and I'm a layman, something else happened. And the housing authority and the medical examiner's office failed to mention that. And I'm asking the district attorney of Brooklyn to look into this, because I believe there's some criminality involved in this, because you can't be a medical examiner's office and not mention something as vital as a blow to the head, and you can't be the housing chair and not look into this deeper if the union is saying, no, there's something involved here. Because what we have here is, if she died of natural causes in a heart attack, her two surviving family members, which are 8 and 11, her children, don't get benefits, don't get compensation benefits. So there's a major problem with the surviving members of her family not getting the benefits that they should have because of her death. And also, you don't have closure because her sister is also a NYCHA employee, and she wants to know, and her brother wants to know, what happened to their sister. And people deserve to know what happened to people when they die. What, in this instance, what happened to Toni Jackson? How did she die?
And have you spoken to the DA, Ken Thompson in Brooklyn, about this? Is this something that you think he is going to pursue?
I believe this is something he will pursue. I believe right now he's looking at the facts. He has our report. Now he has a Department of Investigations report that we didn't know was going on. It came out, and Daily News wrote about it, and it came out today, and I did get a chance to read this report, and I had tears in my eyes when I was reading the report, because NYCHA never mentioned in any of their reports such details as it was mentioned in the Department of Investigations.
And you guys have 7,000, I think 7,400 employees at NYCHA, your
yes,
union?
We have 7,400 employees.
Do you feel like NYCHA, obviously this is another kind of black mark on NYCHA. They've had a long history of just negative events, negative headlines. Do you think there's a systematic problem here that needs to be fixed? And what is that problem, and what should be done?
There's a problem with people understanding their roles in NYCHA. And what I mean by that is, we know the buildings are old. We know NYCHA's underfunded. But we also know that there needs to be leadership there. And leadership means taking responsibility for actions. Now, the new chair came in, and all of these problems existed before she got there. But you don't compound the problem by misleading the public about what's going on there. There are problems, you address them. You own up to them, you address them. No one's suggesting that it's your fault that these things occurred because you just got here. But we are asking you to look into these problems, and we are asking for the truth. We don't want to blame you, but however, if you cover it up, yes, we're going to blame you.
And the City Department of Investigations report also called for essentially 66 of these hoists to be repaired because they're just out of date across 12 projects of NYCHA projects. Where did you get the money for that? Obviously, NYCHA still has financial problems. There is the influx of cash for FEMA settlement money and also the money that the state gave, the $100 million that the state put in the budget. But that money is kind of tied up in ways. It necessarily can't go to just like fix a problem like this, which clearly you can see right now.
Well, if the developments are in the Superstorm Sandy areas, and they could attribute those problems to the storm, they use some of that money for these problems. The $100 million that was given by the state, I believe there's an accounting process attached to that by the governor, that the city controller has to make sure that the money is accounted for.
And the money is spent by the state, essentially, the departments of housing renewal. Yes.
So I'm not sure what they could spend the money on. However, if they can fix these hoists and any other things and present to the controller and the state that this is what they did with the money, I think they'll be satisfied with knowing that they spent the money well and spent the money for what it should be going toward, NYCHA developments. So it's a matter of, yes, we have a shortage of funding. However, the funding that we have to make sure that it's accounted for. We don't want to read in the newspaper that they ordered supplies and a piece of equipment that cost $1,500, they're now selling it for $5. Those sort of things suggest that somebody over-ordered on purpose and they're giving it away to somebody who has a business and they're making a lot of money off the housing authority.
On the matter of the hoist, is there concern for your workers right now, and are you giving your workers any directions to be maybe more careful than they are normally in these facilities?
More carefully, they were directed to not use these hoists. That's one. Two, they were not giving training on the hoist. And three, we know the hoists weren't inspected. So at this point, everyone should know they should not be using the hoist, especially after the state came in and did their investigation and did their what I want to say is they deemed these hoists inoperable.
Yeah.
So no one should be using the hoist.
Your members that work in NYCHA facilities obviously have a firsthand view of everything that's going on there. From that, you talk to them, you hear what they're saying. Do you feel like there is a solution to making things work, or just kind of go more smoothly in NYCHA and getting past this like negative image that NYCHA has as a place where there maybe is mismanagement, and that the people that live in these facilities really are the ones that are being harmed? Because it seems like whenever I talk to politicians especially, it's like they all can sit there and say NYCHA needs to be fixed, and they can all kind of talk on a macro scale of solutions that maybe there should be, but the people who are there every single day probably see the small things that could get done to make it better. What would you say is a couple of those things that maybe it should be improved going forward? And again, funding is obviously something that everyone brings up, but is there something other than funding maybe too?
Yes, there's operational procedures. There's how you spend the money. There's what you spend the money on and how you deploy your people and how you utilize your people. And we have part of the contract that we just settled with NYCHA that we're probably going to get into, that we're going to have a committee that consists of all the unions. And I could tell you the employees, the union members, and the unions have ideas on how we can fix NYCHA, how we could run it more smoothly and make it more efficient. We know where the wastes are. We know how to cut corners without cutting service. We know how to cut costs without cutting service. We know all of these things. But management traditionally does not want to take our ideas because they're in charge and they need to show and justify their salaries that they're in charge. And if they're taking advice from the unions and the employees, that they think that they're not doing what they need to do. I take suggestions all the time. Why? Because suggestions are good. You don't have all the good ideas. Smart person takes suggestions from people. You give them credit for their suggestions and you implement it. You're not doing any less of a job because you take suggestions from someone. Matter of fact, you're doing a smart job because you can't come up with all the ideas.
And you mentioned the contract that's being voted on now. And May 22nd, you guys are going to open those up. Recap for our viewers just what is in that contract. I think it was a 10.4% raise.
10.41%,
yeah.
yes. The contract is consistent with the city pattern that was set by the New York teachers.
Mm-hmm.
It's a $1,000 signing bonus. You have to be on payroll for the $1,000 signing bonus. The first year of the contract is a 1% increase. Actually, it would be the second year because the first year is a $1,000 bonus. The third year is a 1% increase. The fourth year is a 1% increase. Then you have another 1.5%. So almost immediately you have 4.5% because the contract was 5 years behind.
Yeah.
And then the following year, which is next year, is a 2.5% increase, and the last year of the contract is a 3% increase. You add it up together, it's 2.41%. And we also got additional money for our welfare fund, which we did with an extension of the contract. And we also agreed to sit down with the Housing Authority, enter in discussions with the other unions to cut costs, savings, and everything else. So we're going to be bringing a lot of good suggestions to the table, and we're going to give it to NYCHA. We don't know if they're going to take our ideas, but we're certainly going to make ourselves available. We're going to utilize our expertise in these areas because we want to know if you have a certain budget, we want to make sure that you work within that budget and we don't have any waste.
I know that as you're in this negotiation process, there was some criticism in the press that your employees or your union was unflexible, maybe not working outside of regular business hours. How has that been remedied in this contract negotiation, and just in general, do you think that that's something that there could be continued work towards? Because as everyone knows, when you're dealing with a residential facility, obviously like maintenance, sanitation, things like that, they don't generally always happen during business hours, especially if someone late at night needs something.
Well, the Housing Authority has to understand that if you want people to work on the weekend and outside the normal course of business, there is a cost attached to that. Mm-hmm. Now, that's not any more than anybody else in the city. You have the sanitation workers work on the weekend. Their contract calls for extra compensation. So we weren't unreasonable because the Housing Authority is a traditional operation of Monday to Friday. If we want to change anything in our contract, the city would take out their calculators and they would say, well, this is what it would cost to change that. Mm-hmm. We only asked the city for the calculations on how much that benefit was worth to them, which we did not get to this day. So you can't negotiate something unless you know what it's worth. And we didn't receive that information. So that portion was never addressed in this contract because no one gives away something without first knowing the value of it, unless you're the New York City Housing Authority giving away your supplies.
But you guys would be open to doing something like this if you could negotiate that level out, and it seems like you understand that this
Sure.
is a concern that you're going to continually
Sure.
get criticized
Sure.
for because this is how I guess the modern world works. Everyone kind of assumes that you work outside of those business hours.
Look, no one said we're not going to work on the weekends because obviously our caretaker, Toni Jackson, she was killed on the weekend. She was working.
Yeah.
She left her two children, 8 and 11, at home by themselves because we work overtime. But there has to be a way that NYCHA can figure out how much the overtime's worth, how much it would be to pay a differential, and have people work on the weekend. We didn't even get that far. How much are you spending in overtime? How much is it worth? How much is this worth? That's why we sit down. We sit down and cost it out. We didn't get that far. So no one's going to go into negotiations blindly. So that wasn't discussed. Now, they want to continue discussions. Tell us how much you're spending in overtime. Because it's my view that the overtime that NYCHA was using, because last year, talk about 2014, yeah. They used their overtime budget up by the end of March. So come April, there was no more overtime available. They've used their budget. Now, you tell me in 3 months, what were people doing in those 3 months? They were trying to fudge getting rid of tickets, work order tickets, so they could say they did all this work. Meanwhile, I think they were paying people just to show up and just hang around, and work wasn't getting done. That's not a way to run operation. So we can do a lot more with the money that NYCHA has. NYCHA may be underfunded, but the funding that they have, we can use more efficiently.
All right, before I let you go, I just wanted to quickly mention something else that your other employees have done. The school safety employees have been working, and there's a recent Wall Street Journal article about this, about using music to take children in high school who prone to violence or have experiences of violence and kind of make a positive outlet for it. It's called the My School Has Rhythm, Not Violence program. Tell us a little bit about this and why this has been successful.
Well, this program was started, maybe I'm going back maybe 7 years ago, by, at the time she was one of our members, and she's since been promoted, Barbara Welch. And she had this great idea that you would have children rapping about nonviolence in the schools. So she started the program, and the police department and school safety sort of put it on the shelf, but they brought it back, and they brought it back in a big way this year. They got radio station 103.5 involved, or 103.9, yeah. 103.9 involved, and the radio hosts and personalities came out and participated in the program, and they had the auditorium at Boys and Girls High School, and they had 4 finalists in Brooklyn, and they came there, and the children rapped, and Curtis Leewood came, and it was a fascinating program, and we're going to have that on our show because we have a cable access show that's going to be airing this month. And we saw that the children actually got the message that the school safety agents, the police department, really care about them, and they came out and they put on performances that were unbelievable. And the Wall Street Journal covered one of those programs, and it was a fascinating article, and I was so happy to see finally that the truth comes out. The majority of the school safety agents really care about the children. You always get the stories about these incidents, and they're small, and the people that have their own motives to get rid of metal detectors in schools, and this left-wing agenda that children are being oppressed in schools. They're being protected, not oppressed. They have their notion, and firearms and knives are being left on the outside of the schools because of the metal detectors. Had we not had those metal detectors in place, those knives and guns would be brought into schools. So that being said, the program was a huge success, and I would like to see it extended to the rest of the city because they only focus on the borough of Brooklyn. And I would like to see them do a citywide program where they have winners from each borough come together for the finals.
That sounds interesting. I think that there will be a lot of interest around that, a lot of fun for that. I know that the mayor has talked a lot about repairing the community-police relations. Do you see this as as kind of a way to do this? I know obviously school safety officers are officers, not NYPD officers, but still officers. It's still kind of that same mold and same cut as I guess you could see as for anyone who's watching from the outside to see that. Do you think this is something that could be a step that you could build upon, not just to do a larger competition, but also to help in other communities where this is a problem?
Sure. This is something to repair relationships. This is something to build relationships. Another way of building relationships, you have police officers that are on duty referee basketball games with children. Mm-hmm. They interact with children. Baseball games, hockey games, tennis, whatever the sport is, they get involved with the children while they're on duty and go and they get to meet the children and their parents. How about police officers going to the community, going to the churches, speaking at the churches on Sundays? All the churches in the communities. That's community policing. You know who the police officers are. Our problem is the police officers are in a radio car. They're looking out. They see the people. The people are looking in. They're not talking to each other. They don't know each other. A few incidents happen, and all of a sudden, that becomes the norm. No, not all police officers are bad. In any segment of society, you have a small group of people, no matter what, don't want to conform to the rules. I don't care. You pick a profession, whether it's government, union, schools, teachers, firemen, police officers, news journalists. Everybody has a small segment of people that do not want to conform to society, and they just want to be bad because that's who they are. If the majority of the people in the world are bad, we're all in trouble.
Gregory Floyd, the president of Teamsters Local 237, thank you so much for joining us.
Thank you.